This is a slight variation on some of my ideas for self-wicking containers and grow buckets. I'm using a smaller container this time. I think these are 5 litre containers and they are for the hand sanitizer from school. I work in a school, so the school gets through quite a few of these. They're high density polyethylene. They're natural polyethylene, so unfortunately they don't have any UV stabilization on them, so if they're exposed to sunlight they will deteriorate. These are actually food grade containers, so it's the same material as the sort of milk bottles, but these are much bigger, so they're quite good for growing plants in, and also sowing seeds and germinating seedlings and then potting them on. So what I'm doing here, it's a self-watering container, so this is a version of what I've made before, but a sort of miniaturized one. In the past I've used 25 litre containers, and then this time I'm just using a smaller container. So what I've done is, as you can see, this part here is a reservoir, and I've cut off the base of the container, and in the description I'll just let you know what the dimensions are. So it's one cut straight down the centre, and the top part is inverted, and I've drilled a number of 20mm holes around there. All it allows for is moisture to permeate through into the container at the top, and also worms can actually move through into the compost as well, so that will actually help the materials break down in the container, which is quite good. What I've done here is just a little way from the top, I've drilled a little overflow hole, and so if you imagine when this is filled up with water, it will only fill up to that level, and that means that the bottom of the plants, where the substrate is, they won't be sitting in standing water, so they're only going to get a small amount of water through the capillary wick here. And I'm just using some old cotton. I think it's an old cotton t-shirt, so you don't need a whole t-shirt, it's just a little bit wedged in there, and then that will lap down into the water there, and then that will, capillary action will wick the water up to the top. I don't have a subfloor in this one like my larger one, so what I'm doing is I'm just using some offcuts of softwood, and this is stud work timber. It's for internal use, so it's kiln dried, so I wouldn't use anything that's got a wood preservative on it. So as you can see by the colour, it's normally like a green around the outside, and this is just kiln dried, and it's got it stamped on it. It's C16, the timber. And what I've done there, it's a bit of 4x2, so it's about 98 by 44, and I've cut a little piece off the end, and then that fits around that way like that, and that just allows somewhere for the shaped opening, the spout of the container, to drop down, and along with the wicking fabric will fit in. You really need 2 hands to do this. I'm trying to do it and film at the same time, so it's a little bit awkward, but if you're not filming at the same time, it's much easier. So what I'm just trying to do is just push those bits of wood to the side, so the handle nestles down in the gap between the 2 bits of wood, like so. And what I've got here, just if you've got old cardboard, corrugated cardboard, newspaper, it's just a way of filling these containers up, so you're not using loads and loads of compost. So this is quite nice if you're starting a sort of community garden, you want to get students involved and make your own containers. A container like this is quite a good size, but if you're filling this up, you'd need a considerable amount of compost, so it'd be about 10 litres of compost, and obviously you wouldn't have any soil life in it, and then it would settle down, and if you didn't water it over the summer, the plants would suffer as well. So what I'm doing here is trying to create a habitat for soil life, and also enable you to grow plants for sort of minimise the amount of maintenance, really. So what I'm going to do here is, this is going to be a little self-watering container in the centre, so ideally a couple of 100mm pots will fit in there nicely, and it's a terrific way of keeping those pots going on all season, because there's an additional volume of compost around the outside, but because there's going to be worms in here and you're going to add organic matter to this, it's going to break down and be like a slow release, so the worms will feed the soil in those plants, in those pots, which in turn will feed the plant. So you're not putting a fertilizer on it necessarily, you're actually feeding the soil, and that's a big difference between sort of growing organically and growing in sort of in agriculture, where they're growing high yields, but they're using artificial fertilizers to give them that yield without putting the organic matter to build the soil life. So again, to minimize the amount of soil I'm putting in this, I'm going to use some of the offcuts of kiln dried timber, and this is just what I found in a skip, and you can always find offcuts of timber or pallet wood from deliveries and things like that, so you don't have to go very far to find it. And it can be any material, even wood chip, or just something just to add a little bit more or reduce the volume in the container. So what I'm doing is I haven't tried this out before I've started filming, so I'm not sure the best way of fitting these all in. But what I want to do is just wedge some of these blocks around the outside, especially in the corners. And it just means you only need a little tiny bit of compost to get these going. The good thing about these, if you start these in winter, the material will be breaking down before you even start planting. So you'll have a nice source of compost ready to go. So you won't have to be going around the big box stores and buying all the materials in. So you can make use of the waste materials you've got on hand, all the kitchen scraps and things like that. So again, I'm just putting these offcuts of timber in here, just any way they'll fit in really. I think one laying down flat would be nice. And then I'll do one on the other side as well. So what I'll do here, this just makes a minimal amount of compost to fill that up. And this is a variation of what's called hugelkultur, which is where you're burying large logs and trees in the ground, in the beds. And you can build a nice raised bed over it, so you don't have to pay to have material taken away, and you can get a benefit from all that organic matter. So what I'm going to do with this one is slightly different from my other ones. Just get those bits of wood in there. So you can see I've got a piece of wood in each corner, a piece of wood on each side. So again, that's only a minimal amount of compost to fill this up. So what I'm going to do with this container is this part will actually lift out, and then I'm going to use that area inside as a little soil feeding station as well. So as this is growing, the organic matter in there will break down, and then occasionally I'll be lifting this container out and then just feeding the feeding station underneath with leaves and organic matter, just to have a nice source of material in there to break down for the worms to actually take into the container here to feed those plants. What I've done on the outside is I've actually drilled holes around the base of this as well, so it's got a nice amount of soil contact. So putting this on the ground, the worms will be able to come in, they'll move into this container. Because the moisture is there in that little reservoir, that means you'll have nice conditions for worms and other forms of soil life as well. And the outside holes are just going to be little planting pockets where I'm going to grow things like alfalfa, green clover, I believe toadflax, just to make a really nice habitat around here and a source of green manure as well. So the nice thing about this is, even though it's black plastic and it's not particularly attractive, by the time those plants have started growing in there, they're really going to cover up the sides of that container. It's going to look really attractive. It's going to be really good for pollinators as well. And obviously they'll have more bees, more hoverflies, more insects as well flying around this pollinating. And then in turn there'll be a food source for other sorts of bird life and other wildlife as well. So it's a really nice little growing environment. What I'm doing is just using these reclaimed containers. So there's no cost to this whatsoever. It's just a little bit of time to make these and drill holes. So I've got examples of these, the full-size ones planted up. This is, as I said, it's something slightly different because I'm using these smaller containers. And really it's just a really great way of having lots of soil life and creating a habitat in a small environment. And the educational value of this is terrific because you've got the whole carbon cycle here, from growing green manures, providing habitats for soil life, self-watering, so you're minimizing the amount of water you need to actually keep these going as well, and using all these waste materials, so you're finding an alternative use for these materials which would otherwise just go straight into rubbish stream or be recycled. But things like this, if you can get use out of this for a number of years, wash it out and then recycle it, it's much more beneficial for the environment, because you're getting a second and third use out of this material as well. So this can give you, in terms of produce, you can be growing things like kale and chard, and you can grow those in small pots. So you start the seedlings off into the small pot, stand the small pot in here, and then you don't have to worry about maintaining it, because there's all the soil life and all the irrigation that the plant needs. If it's a really dry summer, you might need to put a little bit of supplemental watering on there, but as I said, because it's retaining that water in that reservoir, when you water, all your water is going to go down into there. You're not going to get lots of runoff. And obviously the plants around the outsides will provide a bit of insulation. They'll self-shade as well, and the green manures will actually fix nitrogen into the soils and the compost as well. So it's a quite a neat little system, and as I said, it's ideal for a little workshop, or alternatively, without using the outside containers, you can just use these as a freestanding container. And they're ideal in a greenhouse or something like that, where you don't have natural rainfall, so you need to do all your watering with an irrigation system or watering cans. So this is it's slightly experimental. Haven't done this before, but it's a variation of the other containers which I've made, which I've been super impressed with. But as I'm just basically using a 5 litre container rather than a 25 litre container, so it's a little scale version of what I've made before. So just smaller volume, so smaller pots, but the same kind of plants around the outside. So it's the same sort of habitat and the same soil life. Thanks for watching.